This week on the Gabfest, the United States and Israel go to war against Iran. How is that going to turn out?
The entire reason that we're in this war right now is because President Trump issued at least 9 red lines against the Iranian regime. It seems this war has been prosecuted with incredible military planning and incredible military effectiveness, but very little thinking from the president about his endgame.
The other thing I've been struggling with is mapping the American goals against the Israeli goals and trying to figure out if the Israelis have actually pretty divergent interests. What do you make of all of that?
Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. March 5th, 2026, the What's the Point of the Iran War edition. I am David Plotz of CityCast here in Washington, D.C. I'm joined from New Haven, Connecticut, where she is 1 year older, but 4 years wiser. New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School's Emily Bazelon. Wait, what, John?
Well,
how's that work?
Just because Emily's so much brighter and wiser than the rest of us.
100%. But I didn't understand. I thought there was a ratio of 1 to 4 that I was missing.
No, just David.
And then from New York City, John Dickerson. John has been using some of his free time to hone in on your territory, Emily. Did you know that? He filed his first amicus brief. Fascinating challenge to Trump's newest tariffs. John has a novel legal theory that Trump's tariffs are actually illegal because they contravene rules outlined by the 1861 Morrill tariffs, which are, of course, John's favorite 19th century tariffs, which John believes, for reasons having to do with some quirks in Andrew Johnson's presidency, were never actually repealed. And John has a really profound point about how those tariffs only could apply to iron and textile industries and not to all the industries that Trump has tariffed. And it's really, John, do I have that right?
Oh, indubitably.
This week on the Gabfest, the United States and Israel go to war against Iran. How is that going to turn out? We're going to talk to Karim Sadjadpour of the Carnegie Endowment for wisdom and context. Then, can Texas really turn blue? We will discuss James Tallarico's surprising and relatively easy win in the Democratic Senate primary in that state. Then the Trump administration seems to want to stop persecuting some law firms, or maybe it doesn't. It can't really figure out how to do it. An amazing legal back and forth this week that Emily's going to explain. Plus, we're going to have cocktail chatter. We're joined by Karim Sadjadpour. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a contributing writer at The Atlantic. And he has an article in today's Atlantic, Trump Has Lost the Plot in Iran. Karim, welcome to the Gabfest. What did you mean by that? And did he have a plot to begin with?
Well, if we rewind to January, the entire reason that we're in this war right now is because President Trump issued at least 9 red lines against the Iranian regime, saying if they kill protesters, the United States is going to have their back, and the United States stands, quote unquote, locked and loaded and ready to intervene. And now, 6 weeks after those massacres that took place in Iran in January, the news that both comes out publicly in the president's statements and just in private conversations with folks in the administration, it seems this war has been prosecuted with incredible military planning and incredible military effectiveness, but very little thinking, certainly from the president, about his endgame and what is the ultimate goal of this war. And so, in his public statements, he sometimes says that he's looking to recreate the Venezuela model, decapitating the number one and then doing a deal with the number two. Sometimes he talks about imploding the Iranian regime. Sometimes he talks about continuing this war for another 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes he talks about ending it early. So it doesn't seem to me that there is a clear endgame in the president's head.
The other thing I've been struggling with, or one of the many things, is the mapping the American goals against the Israeli goals and trying to figure out if the Israelis have actually pretty divergent interest from the United States or whether they're aligned. And I feel like that seems really important in terms of what happens next. What do you make of all of that?
I think that's a fair point as well. If you look at this from Israel's vantage point, well, Israel is in Iran's neighborhood broadly. It's within reach of Iranian missiles. And this is an Iranian regime that since 1979, one of its official slogans has been death to Israel. It's been It spent tens of billions of dollars financing and arming regional proxies against Israel. And so it's understandable that from Israel's perspective, it views this regime as an existential threat and it wants to degrade it in every way possible, even if that means you turn Iran into a failed state. I think the United States and certainly U.S. partners in the Persian Gulf have a different perspective. The goal isn't to turn Iran into a failed state. You want to try to transform Iran into something better. And obviously that is difficult. In the last 25 years of U.S. history in the Middle East has proven very difficult for us to do that. But I do think on this issue, there is a bit of a divergence between U.S. and Israeli interests. That said, I think if you were to go to Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump and ask them independently to write on a sheet of paper what is their ideal outcome in Iran, I don't think it would be that much different. They would want to see an Iran whose ethos is not revolutionary ideology, it's national interests, putting the economic and national interests first of the people of Iran, because historically, Iran and Israel have been partners, Iran and the United States have been partners, but unfortunately, we cannot dictate our preferred political outcome here.
What do you make of what's happening in Iran? I mean, who's left? How should we think about Iran and use that to match against what we're hearing from the administration about what they expect to happen in Iran?
Well, the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, who was the supreme leader for 37 years, arguably the longest serving dictator in the world, that has been the political equivalent of a bunker buster in Iran. It's left an enormous crater in the system. And right now, that void is going to likely take potentially years to fill if indeed this regime manages to stay afloat. There's been some reporting, although not yet confirmed, that his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, a 56-year-old cleric, is the likely successor as supreme leader. There's another two guys who are kind of managing the country at the moment. A guy called Ali Larijani, who is seemingly administering the country's political affairs, and then the current Speaker of Parliament, a guy called Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, who's managing the country's military affairs. And, at the moment, I think they've banded together, and this belief that it's a kill or be killed, a do or die moment for the regime. Now, there was reports this morning in The Economist citing Israeli sources saying that they have intelligence that Revolutionary Guards folks, police, other military are not showing up for work. We haven't seen public signs of that, but if indeed that is proven correct, then the regime it already faces an existential moment. But then I think even more it faces this profound decision of whether they continue fighting and risk collapse or they capitulate. And then we go back to President Trump and say, okay, what are the terms here? What is the end game? What are you looking to achieve?
One thing that we haven't seen, at least as far as we know, is a lot of popular demonstrations on the street, a grassroots uprising, anything that would overthrow in the moment the institutions that govern Iran. Do you think there is any popular movement that is germinating, or people just sitting and observing and waiting? What is the role of the sort of mass of Iranian people, especially those who were demonstrating 6 weeks ago? What is their role in this?
So at the moment, people are under cover. They're trying to seek shelter under bombardment. This Economist report I found quite remarkable in saying that the first few days of this war have been we've dropped more munitions on Iran than were dropped in 2003 against Saddam Hussein in that shock and awe campaign. That I found quite startling. There was another stat that Israel has been bombing Iran 1,000 times a day. Now, not all of those bombs are obviously happening in urban areas where people live, but you can see in the city of Tehran The city has been getting bombed. And so at the moment, even President Trump told people in Iran, seek cover. And once the dust is settled, that will be the time to go out and seize your institutions. So at the moment, people are more spectators than they are participants, and fearful spectators. And it's not clear, obviously, when and if the dust settles, if people decide they want to mobilize. The regime, obviously, if they manage to stay intact, they're going to have all their security forces with their fingers on the trigger. They've shown themselves willing to kill en masse to stay in power. They may feel that again now. So the thing with society in Iran, I would say, statistically, empirically, anecdotally, we have a sense that about 4 out of 5 Iranians oppose this regime. The regime has at best perhaps 20%, 15% popular support. But at the moment, up until now, and this could change, but up until now, the regime has remained united, highly organized, highly armed, and ready to kill to stay in power. And it's an opposition which is fractured, not cohesive, doesn't have on-the-ground leadership. And Iranian society is different than a lot of societies in the Middle East, and that it's the regime is a theocracy. Society is trying to separate mosque and state, not join mosque and state. So the opposition to the regime are not Islamists who believe in martyrdom. It's basically people who want, a totally different, have a totally different vision for Iran, a secular vision for Iran.
And the fact that they don't want martyrdom might mean that they wouldn't put their lives on the line in the same way. Is that the implication of that point?
I mean, we saw in January that according to some estimates, Time magazine reported this, that 30,000 people were killed over a 2-day period. So on one hand, they have shown, tremendous courage in the face of a brutal regime, but in contrast to, let's say, the 1978 revolutionaries in Iran that were led by Ayatollah Khomeini, and Khomeini was willing to send as many people as needed to go out and become martyrs for the cause. And we oftentimes see that with other opposition movements to Arab governments. For example, in Syria, the primary opponents of the Assad regime in Syria were Islamists. The folks who oppose this regime in Iran, it's not clear to me that I don't want to say that they're not interested in making those kinds of sacrifices, because they've sacrificed enormously, but their mindset is not martyrdom. It's a totally different kind of politics. And what we know is that when you introduce a power vacuum in a country, it's not usually the poets and the intellectuals who emerge in those environments. So it's men who are able and knowledgeable about mobilizing violence.
Karim, 2 questions, because we're coming to the end of our time together. The first is how this all got started. When we look at the various things Secretary Rubio has said, he said 2 things. One, the imminent nature of the attack was required by the fact that Israel was going to go, and the U.S. made a determination that if Israel went, Iran would retaliate against U.S. targets, and to limit the amount of casualties from that, the U.S. had to go. Then he also said that there was this line of immunity, and that meant, at least as he explained it, as I understand it, Iran was building up such missile capability that essentially it was going to get to a point where it could not be stopped, and would have, and so that the president made a judgment based on the accumulation of missiles and weapons that he had to act. Give me your sense of whether that is plausible. And then the second question is, we have reporting Thursday morning that the president is on the phone with the Kurds saying, okay, go in there, good luck to you. How do you evaluate that in terms of this kind of improvisational shifting rationales for what's supposed to happen in Iran next?
In the future, when the history of this war is written, I don't think people will look back and say there was any evidence that there was an imminent Iranian threat, either an imminent threat that they would acquire nuclear weapons or an imminent threat that they were about to launch missile strikes on the United States or our partners. I think for the president, he felt there was an imminent threat to his own credibility because on 9 occasions, he had issued these red lines and Iran drove a truck through those red lines. And so I think that was the motivation. And it was obviously coupled with the fact that both the United States and Israel saw an opportunity. This is a country that had its air defense system was taken out last June in the 12-day war. Its regional proxies have been decimated. They saw an opportunity to take action. And so I think this was more about, president's credibility, an opportunity to further degrade or even implode a U.S. adversary, but it was not about a preemptive attack against an imminent threat. Now, on the question of the Kurds, the danger here is that Kurds constitute about 10% of Iran's population, and Iranian Kurds are wonderful people, and there are also large Kurdish populations in the Arab world, in Iraq, in Syria, and also in Turkey. But Kurds and Iranians are much closer than Kurds are, let's say, to Arabs and Turks. Historically, linguistically, culturally, they're very much part of the fabric of the society. And they'll never be able to obviously pose an existential threat to the regime because they are only 10% of the population. And the danger here is that if you start to finance and arm Kurdish rebels, a lot of Iranians are very fearful about the idea of the country splintering like Yugoslavia, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories about the machinations of great powers to try to carve up the country. And so if the majority of the population feel that there's an outside effort to start to splinter things, they're not going to be on board with that. So in my view, the greatest kind of antidote to the radical Islamism of the regime is what I would describe as kind of a positive, pluralistic Iranian nationalism, which encompasses Persians, Kurds, Azeris, and others. And there is a danger when you're trying to arm different factions that it backfires on you badly. And off the top of my head, I can't think of many examples or any examples in recent memory where that has ended well for the United States.
Is there any reason to think that vision of a positive, pluralistic nationalism is more attainable in Iran than it has been in Iraq?
Yes, because in contrast to countries like Iraq and many other countries in the Middle East, Iran is a nation with a 2,500-year-old history. So there has been this historic sense of a cohesive national identity in which, if you ask people, a lot of people will say their first source of identity is Iranian, whereas perhaps in countries like Iraq, they may have said we're Shiite or we're Sunni or we're Kurdish first. So I don't think that I personally don't have the same concerns as others that we could end up with a situation like Yugoslavia with different ethnic enclaves. And that's why I do think it's an unwise strategy for us to try to, play these different factions without recognition of the enormous popular sensitivities of the fears people have of because it's also a country in which it's been a historic playground for European powers, for Russia, for the United States, and there is that kind of historical legacy which is important to take into account.
Karim Sadjadpour, thanks for coming on the Gabfest.
Thank you so much.
James Tallarico won the Democratic Senate primary in Texas this week over Jasmine Crockett. Tallarico, a state rep from Austin, won pretty easily, pretty convincingly over Crockett, who had led by a significant amount in recent polls. And Tallarico will now face the winner of the runoff between John Cornyn, the incumbent Republican, and Ken Paxton, the state attorney general, who is challenging Cornyn for the Republican nomination. It is likely to be the most expensive Senate race in history. And Democrats will hope, as they have every year for the past 38 or so, that this is the year they can turn Texas blue again. It's going to be fun since Tallarico is a really interesting new combination, as we talked about last week, a sort of potent combination of piousness, piety, gracious Christianity, and then the snappy soundbite. He's baby-faced, but also kind of carries a shiv with him. So, John, Tallarico won that race fairly convincingly over Crockett, despite polls towards the end of the campaign showing him trailing by 10 or more points. Why did he win? How did it happen?
Well, first we should note that primary polling is a wacky thing. State polling is a wacky thing. So one of the reasons this is more than just a pedantic point is that in the Republican race as well, the idea that Cornyn did better than his polls is inspiring, or is, and this is also true in the Tallarico case, it inspires a lot of the post-game analysis. Like, oh, it was greater than our expectations, therefore there are forces at work here that are larger than we thought. If the polling was off, then your expectations were misaligned, and therefore the forces that you're claiming are larger than you thought may not, in fact, be larger than you thought. In other words, it's not the force that's changed; it's the incorrectness of the polling. So that matters because strategists, not just concerned with Texas, but on the Democratic side, concerned with the future of the party, are like standing over the entrails of this race, deciding like, what does this mean? Can we run a candidate like Tallarico other places, and is it his idiosyncrasies that are important to match, or is it just his messaging? And so this has all these reverberating consequences. Why did he win? He won because he turned out the Latino vote in the 5 largest districts in Texas, where 5 largest Latino districts in Texas. He won by 20 points over Crockett. The rest of the state he won by like 3%. He campaigned in rural districts and did better in those as well. And Democratic turnout blew through the doors, set a record, I believe, certainly more than Harris and 100,000 more than Republicans, and he benefited from that. And so his theory of the case, which was that he could make the case to Democrats that he could win in the general election because he has this kind of crossover appeal, not because he's a particularly middle of the road on policy terms, but culturally, because of it, as you outlined it, David, that he seems to have been able to make that bet pay off. And the reason, again, that's important is, remember from the primaries before 2024, and we'll have this conversation a million times in 2028, in primary races, a lot of what happens is voters think not just about the individual candidate and whether they like them and their positions on things, but they think about what their neighbors will do in the general election. And so they thought, when we get to a general election, Tallarico is a better fit with the state. He was able to make that case.
It is amazing that Tallarico and Crockett turned out more voters than the Republican Senate primary, which was also incredibly contested and incredibly expensive. That is quite surprising. I mean, Texas is a very Republican state, and for Democrats to be that animated that they outvoted an equally competitive primary on the Republican side is kind of amazing. Emily, what did you think the Republican race tells us about whether Paxton or Cornyn is likely to be the nominee?
Well, it was almost an even split, right? So it seems like they could have a really close runoff, but also now maybe President Trump is just going to pick one of them, or try to, right? So Trump announced that he was going to make an endorsement and call on the person he did not endorse to drop out, which is obviously like, shockingly anti-democratic move by the president, right? He's going to decide. The voters are not going to decide. I have to say, I thought it was also, well, I'm curious. I mean, is it also like a pretty smart move? The runoff isn't until May 26th. They're going to each spend a lot of money. So it's like 2.5 months of them criticizing each other and spending a lot of money in this internal infight. I mean, isn't Trump kind of doing Texas Republicans a favor by just anointing one of them if this plan of his actually pays off, John? Or do you see a downside to this?
Well, he's only doing them a favor if it pays off. And because if let's say he picks Cornyn over Paxton, which I think he's going to do, because why would he? Well, we'll see soon enough. But I mean, if he doesn't pick Cornyn, He's asking John Thune and the Senate Republicans to do stuff. And Thune has said, please, pick Cornyn. And so that would be crazy if he didn't. But let's imagine he picks Cornyn and then Paxton says, no, I'm going to stay in. Then he hasn't necessarily done a favor. I don't know if anybody will blame him. They'll probably just blame Paxton. But then it'll be just a complete crazy nightmare. And it'll get even more national attention because everybody covering the race will be able to say, well, is this a referendum on the post-Trump world? How much does he control MAGA? Back and forth. And then Ken Paxton is highly unpredictable. So generally, I agree with your premise that the president is trying to step in here and apply his political muscle to take a seat they think off the map that they wouldn't have to spend a lot of money on. Because if Cornyn can, if Cornyn is the nominee and doesn't have to fight for 2 months in what would be an extremely ugly fight, which is not just tear down whoever the ultimate nominee is, but obviously give 2 months for Tallarico to say, all he'd have to do is just point at that Senate race and say, you want that? And that matches with his existing pitch anyway.
I mean, who knows? Who can say? I mean, Ken Paxton is a fascinating creature. I mean, he is like was made in some murky Texas swamp, like that where only Texans are allowed to go and only creatures of Texas can be created. And he just exists in this way you cannot imagine this person thriving. Like if you put Ken Paxton into Massachusetts politics, who knows what would happen? But he is like made for this kind of brutal, dirty, ultra right, aggro form of politics that sometimes thrives in Texas. And it is hard to imagine him just being like, okay, I put my heart, everything I have into this race. I'm this close, and I'm just gonna, walk away for what? Like you're gonna promise me to be, an assistant attorney general for civil rights or something? Like what is he really gonna do it?
Right. I know. Who knows the wandering mind of Ken Paxton? It is, as you say, I mean, I guess does it come down to what's the better self-aggrandizing, self-preserving move?
Yeah, right.
And so it's going to be fascinating. I mean, also the president's making this move at a time that he's launched a war in Iran that is not popular and that is splitting some of his base. So now he's presenting himself as this magician with his base, which, plenty of evidence to suggest that he is, and that the base is devoted to him and singularly him, distinct from policy beliefs. Although, again, we've seen some wobbliness on Iran and on Epstein, which, by the way, oh my God, the House has subpoenaed, Republican majority in the House has subpoenaed Pam Bondi. Emily, you can explain that later. But over the Epstein files. So I don't know. It's the great open question, which we'll have resolved presumably in a few days.
Emily, do you think Democrats should get themselves and Democratic funders should get themselves excited about Tallarico and should pour money into it? I mean, on the one hand, you would say like, well, pour money into it. It distracts Republicans. It animates Democrats in Texas. And even if it's Cornyn is unbeatable, which I suspect he is, even if Cornyn is unbeatable, it's still worth the effort to just get Democrats excited about what is happening in the state and to maybe help with a House seat or two that seemed unattainable, or save all that money and channel it into places where there's a much greater chance of victory into Maine or into North Carolina.
I guess to me, the question is, are there other benefits of the money? I mean, there are a couple interesting congressional races like Bobby Polito, right? Who has like his own charisma as a singer, and seems like he could be a rising star, but also it's going to be hard for him to win. And then there's just like the difference between just like spending all the money on this race versus a deeper kind of organizing, because it seems like what Texas Democrats need is just like a stronger operation and set of advantages or relationships going forward, if they're ever going to really turn Texas blue. And so if you could use the money not just like on Tallarico, but on trying to lay some of that groundwork, and so you have more lasting effects going forward, that would seem to be more worthwhile to me. John, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Geez, I did so well.
Wow. Just a reminder that like the last really competitive race in 2018 was when Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz and got within 3 points of beating Ted Cruz. Now, Beto O'Rourke, a much more known quantity in that race than Tallarico is yet. Ted Cruz is somewhere, I think, between Paxton and Cornyn on the likely to annoy Democrats spectrum as well, and likely to turn off certain categories of Republican. Cruz was not that liked, but he's not quite as disliked as Paxton might be. He doesn't have all the character flaws that Paxton has. So I don't know. I mean, if you got within 3 points in that race, if this is an even more unhappy electorate.
I mean, also the Democrats have an uphill climb to win the Senate, so they're going to have to pick a bunch of races, right? I mean, Texas isn't at the top of their list, but if they decide to cross it off now that they have this candidate who has this kind of national appeal, that seems like it would be kind of a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, they got to pick. Tallarico is kind of a reverse Murdoch. We talked about the Republican Senate candidates who have hurt the party from their local races. Presumably, Tallarico is a candidate who has the ability to do good things for the party's image nationally. A thing that really struck me in the primary day took place in Arkansas and not Texas. It was another seat that the Democrats have flipped. The Democrats have now, as of early March 2026, Democrats have flipped 27 state legislative seats since the start of the current administration. Republicans have yet to flip one. So one of the things that people are imputing to Tallarico's victory is this idea of a thermostatic response in the electorate, which is to say that they are responding to Donald Trump and they want to turn the thermostat in the opposite direction. So if he's too hot, they want to go cool. And that has led to this massive turnout for Democrats, and that is a worry for Republicans in Texas, that there's going to be this general feeling. Well, boy, is that general feeling showing up in these legislative seats, and that's across the whole country. So that, to me, is to the extent people are trying to read signs out of this primary day, that's one that's interesting.
I thought you were going to mention the other crazy Arkansas story, which is that there's an Arkansas sheriff's race.
Oh, yeah.
Where the guy who will be the sheriff, he won the Republican nomination, has been is charged with murder.
That's crazy.
And beat the incumbent. I mean, it's complicated, but wow. Emily, tell us about the very confusing Justice Department surrender followed by abandonment of surrender in cases involving 4 law firms that got on the wrong side of the Trump administration. Remind us kind of what this case is about and how it's unfolded.
Yeah, dial back to the beginning of the Trump administration, and there were these executive orders from Trump that were basically trying to destroy the businesses of a whole bunch of law firms that he saw as enemies for whatever reason. Like they had represented someone he didn't like or done a lot of business with Democrats. And so he was going to say that they couldn't even come into government buildings in some cases, or they couldn't have contracts with the government. So there were 9 firms that famously capitulated and agreed to do tons and tons of supposedly pro bono work for President Trump's causes. And then there were 4 firms, Perkins Coie, Wilmer Hale, Jenner and Block, and Sussman Godfrey, that fought back. And they went to court and they sued, and they all won in district court because this is like totally a violation of their First Amendment rights, their freedom of association. These executive orders were in the view of the district courts, just like a very clear abuse of executive power. And so ever since, the Justice Department, the Trump Justice Department, has been facing this question: are we going to appeal these rulings? And this week they decided, no, we're not going to appeal. And they didn't explain their withdrawal, but everyone thought, okay, well, they realize they're going to lose. They don't want to make some bad law at the circuit court level, and they're just like moving on from this episode. But no, then
but wait.
But wait, then like a day or two later, the government files this brief, but kind of just unbelievable motion to withdraw the motion to voluntarily dismiss these appeals. And I mean, look, like obviously there was a kind of sensible set of decision making made at some level. I'm sure that it went up the food chain because it was a big deal, but somebody high up then decided this is embarrassing. We have to press forward with these appeals nonetheless, et cetera. It just all signals that there's just kind of shambolic nature to this, right? I mean, what's the White House counsel doing in his relationship with the Justice Department that this would have all got changed around so quickly? Did the president just get really pissed off? Like, I don't think we really know the answers to those questions yet, but it's just embarrassing.
Do you go up a food chain, or do you go up the chain of command?
I guess you go up the chain of command, but can't you sort of go up a food chain too? Like there's a food chain, you think of like little animals and big animals eating them. So that was sort of what I was thinking.
Yeah,
but
no, I understand the directionality of the food chain. I just wondered if
Emily, can you just dig into the legal case here? So there's an executive order, and it says you law firms cannot do business with the government. You can't have clearances. You can't have access to government buildings. And so they then say this order is illegal or it's unconstitutional because of the First Amendment.
Yeah, I mean, the idea here is that everybody deserves legal representation. For the president to come in and say we are punishing these firms because they were just doing their job means that they don't have freedom to associate under the First Amendment to continue to do their jobs and represent and speak. And all of those activities are protected by the First Amendment and are also core to their business. And the government was interfering with all of them. And that's like classically what you're not supposed to do under the Fourth Amendment, which is about freedom of speech and association, et cetera.
So this is being treated by the law firms and those who support the law firms rightly as a victory. I mean, assuming they'll also go on ahead and win the appeals that will now have to be litigated. But the firms have spent a lot of money. It's been taking a lot of energy. I bet, there are examples of them retaining clients or in some cases winning clients, or people have cited that. I bet they've lost clients too. I bet this has not been easy for them. And so I wonder, Emily, how you feel about, in some sense, this is a vindication of their strategy. And certainly they're on the side of right and the law and history and tradition and what we want, but that it isn't, it's not like we're better off than we were before this happened.
Oh, we're totally not better off. I guess I'll say this. I think that these four firms benefited in some ways by standing up for principles here. They've gotten lots of commendation and credit in the legal world for doing that. I hope they have gained clients. Some of the firms that capitulated lost some key important lawyers and business. And I think that's an important part of the story, right? That there can be a cost to being seen as capitulating and appeasing that came out on the other side. I think the really clear and really serious cost of these executive orders is everybody else. It's all the work that lots and lots of other law firms no longer do because they're afraid. Because this order had a huge chilling effect among law firms. Like, okay, well, you just don't want to get on the bad side of President Trump. And so we're not going to sign the amicus brief in, the birthright citizenship, in the birthright citizenship challenge. We're not going to necessarily provide the same support in litigating cases on behalf of immigrants that we did before, right? There are all kinds of ways in which firms can just pull back from challenging the Trump administration because there has been so much litigation. And it's really striking to me reporting on this that people with the kinds of very high profile claims against the government, whether it's because they got fired or forced out or they're a whistleblower, those people usually have no trouble finding big law firms to sign on and either represent them directly or support the work of other attorneys. This time there's like a huge hole, and you see these mid-level firms and these small shops taking cases, which, I mean, like, it's totally great and commendable to see all those other lawyers stepping up, but they're doing it because the big fish in the pond are swimming away. And I think that's what we've really seen from these executive orders. And it's not the 9 firms that have been, shamed, Paul Weiss foremost among them, but also Skadden Arps, et cetera. It's all these other players in the system that have just like gotten scared.
Emily, let me see if I can ask this moral question without losing my thread. So unlike one of the arguments for companies that are doing business with the way Donald Trump likes to do business, which is paying him obeisance, jumping when he says jump, is that they've got a fiduciary duty to their shareholders, and this is the cost of doing business. Sorry, but it is. And it might be unappealing, but it's a cost of doing business. In law and journalism, there is a code, there's a kind of sense of what gives your life meaning. There is a theology that surrounds the work that mitigates against just saying this is the cost of doing business. And the people engaged in that work talk about that theology kind of a lot because it kind of slops into the actual work they do. In that context, have the people who, the Paul Weisses of the world, have they lost a kind of stature, or do people think and really lost stature, or do people just think like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't cool and they're not my moral heroes, but it's the cost of doing business and they were just trying to protect themselves?
I think they've lost stature, but maybe not enough. So this is the thing I ask law students a lot. Like, are you interviewing at Paul Weiss? Do you think about them differently? Did you take this list of 9 firms with you when you were thinking about where to go for the summer or, apply for a job post-graduation? And are you just like blacklisting them? And I don't see that kind of general like social condemnation in law student world. No, I mean, I don't have like a representative sample. I'm just like asking students I run into, not just Yale students since I'm here, but students at other schools. There hasn't been like a movement to really have that kind of decision making. And so I do feel a little bit like there's a lot of path of least resistance going on right now in law world. And, you can also think about the bar associations. How much have they really stood up to Trump? What about some of the Justice Department lawyers who seem to be doing things that totally contravene the standards for professional responsibility? My understanding is there's been a very anemic response from bar associations when people have tried to file complaints against people like Lindsay Halligan, the, kind of made up for a while U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. She's just one example. There are a bunch of Trump administration lawyers who have done things that really seem like a problem, like you'd want to go investigate if you were their professional organization. And I don't really see that happening. So I think that, there's some not very proud behavior going on.
But John gets at something really important here, which is that I love that idea of philosophy or theology.
Me too.
The idea of the theology. And it does seem that the more theological the profession, the greater the ability for it to resist what Trump is doing, immoral things that Trump is doing. So you see it, literally from theologians, of course, but you also see it from in medicine. There's resistance to certain kinds of things because of theological principles about how you treat patients in law, and you see it a bit in academia, although less. You see it at the professor level, but you don't really see it at the administration level where that theology holds less. And I think that's an important way of thinking about where resistance can come from. When there's a strong moral code guiding the institution, guiding the profession, the guild. I don't like guilds generally, but this is the case where guildness is a good thing because it creates these moral values for your work that are important.
Yeah, I mean, lawyers, doctors, other professions have a professional code that is not just making money, right? I mean, this idea that everybody deserves a right to legal representation is core to the bar. So, why do we have 9 law firms willing to compromise that principle, right? Once there is internal dissent about it, and there will be when there's financial and political pressure, then the principle itself starts to wobble. And I think that is a real problem and something that the bar at large needs to think about more.
Can I ask one last question on this, Emily, which is why do you think universities have been less successful at fighting back? Is it because that they have direct contracts with the federal government that the government can just kind of like choke and therefore their ability to resist is weaker?
I mean, remember, Harvard did sue. So you could argue that Harvard took the same path as these law firms. But when you look at the financial consequences for Harvard, just the billions of dollars at stake, and then also the investigative powers of the federal government, which have also been threatened, it's just like a different level of threat. I mean, I think some of the schools have actually tried to stand up, but their relationship with the federal government is different. They're just, all of their scientific research is bound up in, if not getting back their canceled grants, being able to apply for grants going forward, and that's been very hard.
Let us go to cocktail chatter when you are seeing the first bright glimpses of spring. John, when you're sitting down for a cocktail and it is still light out, it isn't dark out because spring is here, what will you be chattering to Mrs. Dickerson about?
A couple of things. First of all, my imagination was totally captured by that description, and I am ready for that moment to come.
Daffodils, irises, please, crocuses.
What will I be chattering? Oh, poor the long-suffering Mrs. Dickerson. I will be, well, damn it. I'm going to chatter about productivity numbers because on Thursday, the non-farm business productivity came out. Why does that matter? Because productivity has for a long time been seen as something that if it goes up, it means basically prosperity will be more broadly shared. That was the story for America until, maybe the 70s. And there's been a question as technological improvements have taken place, whether that link still exists. And so productivity comes out. Productivity was high in the third quarter, 5.2%. That's well over the 2.2 average. This period in the fourth quarter, it came in at 2.8. So that's pretty good too. But here we go. This is the interesting part. Inside of it is the percentage of output that goes to workers as compensation fell to 53.8%, the lowest level in the entire history of this measurement. So productivity's up. Normally that would have meant great, good stuff for the economy, but the gains are not making their way through the transmission system. And if that's broken, then what you end up having is robots that are making, everything more productive, but it's not going to the humans. And so it's another way in which we see this divergence in our economy. One way we see divergence is the gains are going to the top and not the bottom, the so-called K-shaped economy. We saw this week from Fidelity that the averages for 401ks are at record highs. Hey, that's great. Except also the number of people who are making emergency withdrawals from their 401ks is 3 times as high. It's also at a record high, 3 times as high as during the pandemic. So you have the top half doing well, or not half, but the top portion doing well, but the folks at the bottom who are, who have historic credit card debt are also pilfering their 401ks to pay for things like medical expenses. So anyway, Mrs. Dickerson at this point is into her third cocktail for having had to listen to all of that.
Emily, what is your chatter? Usually it'd be like, surely. I mean, Emily usually can be guaranteed to give the real downer chatter, but John has started us so low that I don't think you can take us lower.
I have been paying attention to Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security. She appeared before Congress this week, and there were some real signs of life from a couple of Republican senators questioning her, Tom Tillis and also John Kennedy of Louisiana. And what Kennedy was exercised about is this $220 million ad campaign that DHS ran a couple months ago that's like telling everybody telling all the undocumented immigrants in the country that they should all just leave. It prominently features Kristi Noem on horseback in front of Mount Rushmore. Who shot those photos? Who handled that part of the ad shoot? Well, it seems to be a firm run by the husband of Noem's former chief spokesperson at DHS. And this was a no-bid contract that the government awarded to this firm that has obviously very close ties. Noem claimed she knew nothing about this, that none of the political appointees touched the bidding process for this. I don't know. We'll see. But maybe we won't see, because the other crazy to me story about Homeland Security this week is that the Office of the Inspector General, led by Joseph Kafari, sent these kind of desperate letters to Congress saying, we're trying to do a bunch of investigations. We can't get any documents from DHS that we are supposed to be entitled to. The Inspector General says they have a right of access to all records, information, and other materials available that relate to the department's programs and operations. There are some little exceptions. They don't seem to be invoked here. And they're just like not turning over the material. And this includes an audit of how ICE has been investigating use of force incidents. Right, which might seem to be super relevant in light of the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, among other use of force incidents. So, you know, to take a little step back here, I mean, this has been a real concern of people I've been talking to in the government, that these avenues of oversight that are internal, right? Ombudsman or a civil rights office, or especially all the offices of Inspector General through the government, that they've just been totally neutered in this environment. And if Trump, of course, fired a whole bunch of these inspectors general, but he did not fire this guy, Joseph Kafari. And now he's basically saying to Congress, like, I just can't do my job.
Amazing. All right, my chatter. First, log rolling. I just want to remind everyone, I have a new podcast, Your City Could Be Better, where I'm talking about ways cities are doing things that are innovative and where they could be better. And it's actually great. I'm enjoying it so much. It's a weekly podcast via CityCast. And this week I talked to our CityCast Salt Lake host, Ale Vallarta, brilliant Ale Vallarta, about this strange plan to build a gigantic homeless shelter in Salt Lake City and then involuntarily commit perhaps thousands of people into it. It's a very kind of old school idea about solving homelessness. So please check out Your City Could Be Better. That is not my chatter. My chatter is actually about Vaseline. So do you guys have this experience of Vaseline? I have a container of Vaseline.
I don't know, David.
I have a container of Vaseline. I use Vaseline. Stop it. Stop it. Get your mind out of the gutter.
Oh my God,
get your mind out of the gutter.
My mind is
My
mind is not in the gutter. I just want to acknowledge. Do you guys have this experience with Vaseline? I mean, that if we sold T-shirts, that quote should be on it.
So I put Vaseline on my lips before bed every night, and I noted that I have this container of Vaseline which I use. And that container of Vaseline I bought like conservatively 6 years ago. And it's 98% of it is still there. And I'm just wondering, has anyone in the entire history of humanity ever finished a container of Vaseline?
Me,
like Vaseline lasts forever. It lasts forever, and you can get infinite number of uses. I don't even understand how the Vaseline company stays in business, because like you buy one once and then you never have to buy it ever again. Except Emily.
I think often people just abandon them and buy it again. But I found really teeny tiny containers of this, like an inch big.
Yeah.
And I love them because then it's like you can have them in your carry-on, and
they last for 4 years.
No, they don't last for 4 years. I do the same thing as you. I put it on my mouth at night, I swear. That they do last a long time, but actually I did get to the end, like the actual end of one, where I was like, literally, there's nothing anymore.
With one example.
It's true.
One micro mini container of Vaseline has been finished in the entire history of Earth.
Yeah, true.
That's it.
Guys, we are a hair's breadth from starting to talk about bursitis and stuff like that.
No, I'm not.
Come on. This is like, I actually had this conversation with a colleague the other day. We talked for about 15 minutes. If what would I talk about over cocktails? I definitely would talk about this. Emily is a lot more interested in this than she was interested in whatever your gloomy Gus chatter was 10 minutes ago.
Guilty as charged.
Wow.
Listeners, you have chatters. Please email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Keep them coming. And our listener chatter this week comes from Malcolm Smart, and I bet it's more interesting than John's. He says vindictively.
Greetings, Gabfest listeners. I'm Malcolm from Harrogate, a small town in the north of England. My chatter is about a piece in the New York Times magazine entitled, "Why on Earth Have I Seen the Same Broadway Show 13 Times? An Investigation." It tells how the writer went to see Operation Mincemeat, a musical, only to return again with a friend, then her son, then her other son, and later her husband, and even more. It was a delightful read about the world of fandom that she never expected to become a part of, and her confused, almost guilty feelings about it. We had to go see the show in London. It was excellent. Tons of fun and a great night out. Would we return more than 10 times? Not really. That would be a little crazy. But we have booked to see it again with my sister, and maybe our sons would enjoy it too.
Operation Mincemeat, I also recommend it, and that piece by my colleague Taffy Brother-Ackner is very funny.
I'm psyched to go check it out myself at some point.
We are not the only podcast that Slate has. Death, Sex, and Money has a very apropos episode this week. They're talking to Graham Plattner. Graham Plattner is, of course, the oyster farmer who's running for Senate in Maine, and he's trying to win the Democratic primary and then run up against Susan Collins. But he has a really interesting, long history. He had to recently cover up a tattoo that looks suspiciously like a Nazi symbol. And last week, before the Iran attacks, Anna Sale, the brilliant Anna Sale, sat down with Graham Plattner to discuss his campaign and his upbringing in Maine. Check it out. That is all for our episode this week. We have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court case about whether stoners should be allowed to own guns. That is only something that Slate Plus members can get, who also get lots of other great stuff for their subscriptions. They get bonus episodes. They get discounts to our live shows, like the series we just had, access to our cocktail party tickets. And they, of course, they never hit the paywall on the Slate site. So if you are a member, thank you very much. If you're not a member, become a member today. You really should do it. Just become a member by subscribing to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. The Political Gabfest is produced by Nina Porzucki. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Mia Lobel is Executive Producer of Slate Podcasts. And Hillary Fry is Editor-in-Chief of Slate. Hillary and I are going to see each other next week. I don't think we've ever met in person. That's exciting. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.